Hi everyone, this is a short screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin for CIMA E2 for November 2014. In this particular screencast, we're going to be looking at ethics and in particular CIMA's Code of Ethics and just issues pertaining to the code being compromised by the actions of certain parties within this particular company. Okay, so in terms of the scenario, really, I think having a feel for the ethical code, the CIMA code, and you may recall that's under the mnemonic COPPI, C-O-P-P-I. Having a grip on that is important. This is a reasonably well-examined topic under the E2 syllabus. I wouldn't say it's once every 3 or 4 sittings, but it's certainly examined every couple of years or so. So quite a soft topic, quite easy to deal with if we know just the basics of the CIMA code. So in this particular case, what we have is a CIMA member who's been looking at expense claims, and there are a couple of issues relating to those claims and relating to the actions of the finance director. In this particular case, we have some non-business related expenditure that it's being claimed by the finance director, and there have been no answers forthcoming from this particular person. In addition to that, there looks to be some sort of bribe or a personal bonus being offered in exchange for silence. So let's just remember on a sort of a broad level that ethics is about the difference between right and wrong, again in a broad sense, and in particular the code sets out a series of sort of principles or guidelines that CIMA members in particular are required to adhere to. So a typical scenario on ethics will be some sort of outline of some issues, some problems. We'll be just looking to pick those up. Quite clearly there are 2 here, and we'll be able to hopefully lay out on paper as to how these particular instances of slightly unusual or unethical behavior impact upon the code or the elements of the code. Okay, so in terms of the answer, what we'll see is not too much of an introduction here. Perhaps we could have said what ethics is defined as, i.e. Right and wrong, or the difference between right and wrong, and that individuals and professionals and members of professional bodies are really required to act in an ethical manner. What they do say here is that obviously professional bodies have codes that they publish, and why do they do that? Well, really they want to regulate the behavior of their members and indeed protect individuals and employers, and also in particular to protect the public interest. Okay, so key points to bear in mind here, perhaps a definition of ethics, but certainly why do codes exist, and they exist in order to provide guidelines or principles for behavior of members so that various parties are protected. Okay, they launch then into the key problems and the key issues. Now, if this sort of question was to come up, I'd expect there to be at least 2, if not 3 areas of the code that are being dealt with within the question. The first one that they choose is this idea of professional behavior, and that's an easy one to relay, really, because anything that is unusual or unethical will probably have some contravening of this guide of professionalism or professional behavior. Now, in particular, this idea of claiming non-business related expenses is certainly not in line with laws and regulations, certainly not tax regulations, and it may well be that it could be seen to be against the public interest because, in effect, we're looking at sort of public funds and indeed taxes. Over and above that, they say that there's a possibility of the profession being discredited. Obviously, it would be if we have a member who is really claiming items that they shouldn't be, and perhaps there is an issue of the duties of the particular duties of the financial controller not being carried out properly, again because of this sort of iffiness in relation to claim of expenses and contravening regulations. Okay, so first issue then is behavior. I would have thought that that's always one that you could use in these types of questions. The second one, again fairly obvious, this idea of the bonus being offered, and certainly integrity is an issue, and that simply means to act in an honest fashion, act in an honest way, to be honest in all business dealings. So if they were to accept this, then there would certainly be an issue with regard to her honesty, and certainly the finance director, by offering the bonus, is certainly not showing any element of integrity. Next point, I guess a fairly sort of broad one you would expect here is just this idea of, competence and due care. And the individuals, certainly CIMA members, are required to act diligently in accordance with standards, with technical and professional standards. And by accepting or indeed offering a bribe, by claiming non-business related expenses, that wouldn't be seen to be in line with professional standards. So I think you'll see that the ones above, professional behavior, integrity, competence, and due care, you could very nearly bend those around any sort of ethical issue, and those are the ones I would have thought that they would expect to see in an answer in some way, shape, or form. So, if I was in doubt, I would be inclined to include them and refer to them. A couple of other points they mentioned. This paragraph here talks about this idea of certainly confidentiality. And I guess this sort of works in reverse, in the sense that you're certainly required to act in a confidential matter in relation to business dealings. But given the fact that the issues at hand are quite severe, there would be a requirement on D to disclose these claims, or the claims of non-business expenses, and indeed the infringement of regulatory requirements by the finance director. So it's to some extent overridden by the severity of the actions that have been detailed in this scenario. Next point, again, one that you'll see fairly common in ethical questions, this idea of objectivity. And really, that simply means free from bias. So if D was to accept a bribe and therefore be under the sort of undue influence of the finance director, that would certainly be or impact upon the level of bias and create a very, very clear conflict of interest. Okay. So in terms of a summary point, really this last paragraph is really quite a general point, and really saying that certainly the actions as detailed within the scenario would go against the code and would certainly have the effect of damaging CIMA's reputation as a professional body. So very quick, nice little summary there at the end. So in summary, overall, I would say on this issue of ethics that knowing the mnemonic is important. COPPI, pretty easy to remember that. We're going to have perhaps some sort of definition of ethics in our first paragraph, although they didn't do that here. And then moving on from that is simply a question of identifying it within the scenario. It should be fairly easy to do. There are only two main items here, the non-business expenses and the bribe, and just really showing how those instances or those examples breach each of the elements of the code. And as mentioned earlier, I would expect at least two or three, certainly behavior, perhaps integrity and competence, to be tested within this type of scenario. Don't forget the other ones, the add-ons, objectivity and confidentiality, but certainly those first three I would have thought are a fair game in this type of ethics question. Okay, many thanks for listening, and I hope that was helpful.